All right, this stuff is so good. Look, let's go on ahead and talk about it. We're going to talk about the people of the state of New Mexico versus Ms. Gutierrez, who was responsible. Hannah Gutierrez, I had to get her first name right. Hannah Gutierrez, who was the armorer on the Rust movie set in the shooting death of Helena Hutchins. Alec Baldwin is central to that case. Let's go on ahead and talk about it, because now what you're seeing right here is you're seeing, and of course this is on Court TV, you're seeing day one of the opening statements with the prosecution and the defense. I had a chance to listen to some of the opening statements, and we got to talk about this. Let's talk about it. Here we go. All right, these videos are authorized by Title 17, United States Code, Section 107, U.S. Copyright Law for fair use, criticism, teaching. I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice, but I am a firearms instructor, force science analyst. I've been a firearms instructor for quite some time, former cop, military, all that great stuff. Okay, screw the resume. Let's go on ahead and get into it. Shouts out to Court TV and even Law and Crime and other channels for providing this coverage. And I'm assuming after this one is done, we will see the state of New Mexico prosecute Alec Baldwin for this. But let's go ahead and talk about it, because those of you all who have followed me before, you already know that I am at the but not for her not doing her job, we wouldn't even be here. We wouldn't even be here. So let's go on ahead and talk about it. Let's listen into the opening arguments, and I'm going to chime in when I feel it's necessary. Here we go. Oh, wait. We were there. All right, let's go.
Miss Hutchins' death and to the live rounds being brought onto the set. A bit later on, I'm going to explain to you exactly how we believe that happened. Give me just a minute. I'm going to put some images up on the screen for you guys, but there's a little process we have to go through to get that going.
Now, his opening arguments, I sat there listening to the whole one. He's not the most exciting prosecutor, but he is methodic. So I do like that. Let's talk about it.
Thank you.
And I'm really of the opinion
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Helena Hutchins. This is the victim in the case that we're here to deal with this morning. Miss Hutchins was born in Ukraine on April 9th, 1979. She was married. Her husband's name is Matthew, and she has one son who was 9 years old at the time of her death. As a child, Miss Hutchins lived on a Russian military base located in the Arctic. She took an early and keen interest in film and journalism. She studied both economics and journalism at the Kiev National University, where she received a degree in international journalism. Miss Hutchins met her husband, Matthew, when she was working in the United States in Los Angeles, California. They hit it off so well that they eventually got married. And when Miss Hutchins moved and immigrated into the United States, she continued her education, and she eventually earned a master's degree in 2015 from the American Film Institute Conservatory. While in Los Angeles, Miss Hutchins transitioned into the film and television industry, working as a cinematographer. This was a job that she loved and she had a great passion for. For those of you, I'm sorry.
I don't know, just speak up.
Okay, I apologize. My microphone has been off this whole time and I didn't know. For those of you who may not know, a cinematographer is a person who works behind the scenes on a film, and the cinematographer is responsible for creating the overall vision of the film. In very basic terms, the cinematographer decides how the movie will be lit and colored and how the final footage will appear on the screen when you watch the movie. And in fact, Miss Hutchins was working as a cinematographer for the movie Rust, which when she was tragically shot and killed on October 21st, 2021. By all accounts, from the folks who knew her and worked with her, and many of those you will be hearing from, she was a gifted and talented artist, but above all, she was a loving wife and mother. And like Miss Hutchins, the defendant, Hannah Gutierrez, was also a behind-the-scenes member of the Rust crew. Ms. Gutierrez was hired to perform a dual role on the movie. She was hired to be both an armorer and a props assistant. As a props assistant, it was Ms. Gutierrez's primary duty to essentially go out and source and bring back to the film set everything that the actors need to touch as part of making the movie. So for example, if they're doing a kitchen scene, then Ms. Gutierrez would have gone out, purchased plates, cups, glasses, forks, all of that sort of stuff. And then those would have been incorporated into the set. Ms. Gutierrez's other role was as the movie's armorer. And it's that role that really has brought us here today. The armorer has a few key responsibilities. The first responsibility is to source and bring to the set all of the firearms that are going to be used as part of the movie. So for a modern movie, that may have required her to purchase or obtain machine guns, semi-automatic handguns, long rifles, and that sort of thing. But for a Western like Rust, the armorer would have to source weapons that were in use at the time so that the movie looks more authentic. And so that would include finding old-looking revolvers and shotguns and things of that nature. I've just put up a photo. This is the firearm that Mr. Baldwin was using in this movie. This is also the firearm that was used in the incident that resulted in the death of Ms. Hutchins. One of the things that I think it's important for you all to understand is that throughout this trial, we all may refer to these type of firearms as prop guns, but make no mistake, they are legitimate firearms. Yep. If you put a live bullet inside of these guns, they will fire. So
now here's the question. Well, all right, in fairness, I was going to say, here's a question. Why do they need to have real guns on the set? But I am going to show you a prop gun. Okay, I'm going to show you a prop gun. And in showing you this prop gun, here we go. So this is a Bruno automatic, okay, 8mm 1911 style pistol, okay. Now this does not take live rounds, but it does take 8mm blanks, okay. As you can see, it looks like a World War II style 1911 pistol. Slide locks to the rear. Okay. Slide locks to the rear. And this would be the type of firearm that would be used on a movie set. But this is specifically a blank pistol. Even though it looks like a 1911 or an M1911, right? Something they would use in World War II. It only takes 8mm blanks. 8mm blanks. It does not take 45 automatic Colt pistol rounds. So my question is, did they have to use a real gun? That's the question that I have. Did they have to use a real gun? Was there a blank semi-automatic revolver they could have used? I'm just curious about those things because that's not the only one that I own. I also have a Beretta that does the same thing, but it only takes blanks. Only takes blanks. Let's continue.
We sometimes refer to them as prop weapons, but they are absolutely capable of causing a projectile to fly out of the barrel. The other thing that it's important for you all to know is that although this particular weapon looks old, it is actually a brand new gun.
And see, the thing is, let me show you this too.
Was purchased
I gotta show you this too.
Directly from the manufacturer for this.
Pause this. So I gotta show you this too, because with this blank gun, let's look in the barrel. Okay, let's look in the barrel. Now now you see the action is open, right? And this is the magazine for the 8mm rounds. Let's look in the barrel. Now, I'm shining the light in here. Do you see that light in this barrel? No. You don't see that light in this barrel. Unlike if I were to take my CZP-10, okay, no mag in the well, no round in the chamber, okay, mag out, round out, no round in the chamber, right? I go on ahead and point that, shine the light, you can clearly see that light. I'm trying to make sure it's in the camera, okay? Sorry about that. You can clearly see the light coming through. You can see that, as opposed to this blank pistol, right? So my question is, what was so important about this movie where we had to have real guns? What was so important in this movie where we had to have real guns that shot blank or real rounds? I just wanted to point that out. Okay? Let's get to it.
For the purpose of being used in this movie. And although it looks old, it's not a gun that has had hundreds or thousands of rounds put through it. It was a brand new and perfectly functioning gun when it arrived on the set. The second thing that the armorer is responsible for is sourcing and purchasing blank and dummy ammunition. You're going to be hearing a lot throughout this trial about the differences between live ammunition, blank ammunition, dummy ammunition. So I'm just going to kind of give you a 10,000 foot overview of what this stuff is. The image that's on your screen right now is what's called a blank round. A blank round is actually pretty easy to distinguish because it has that crimped end where normally a bullet would be. The reason that blanks are used in the movie is because when it's in the gun and an actor pulls a trigger, there is enough gunpowder inside of that blank to cause a pop and have a cloud of smoke come out from the gun, but it doesn't have a projectile that shoots through the barrel of the gun. So these are a type
that's not the only reason. That's not the only reason. So here's one thing that he did leave out in this, and that is another reason why you want to use blanks is because it's not just the loud pop. It's not just the poof of smoke and the gunpowder, things like that. Got it. It's not just that. You also need to have enough gunpowder to cause the slide to go out of battery and eject a casing out of the gun, and then have more blank rounds in here to actually have something that reloads into the chamber. So you want to have blank rounds that have just enough gunpowder to produce the physical effects of that gun. For the realism, you want the casing to go out of the gun itself through the ejection port. You want that. So it's the realism effect as well, not just what he was explaining. So, and it's important that prosecutors and anyone trying cases, you actually know all of what you're talking about, not just part of it, and be able to communicate that to a jury, right? So he's doing good. He just missed that one part. Let's get back to it.
Round that is used frequently on the movie sets, especially whenever they want to make it look like the actor is actually firing a weapon.
Now, in fairness, in this case, they were not using semi-automatic firearms. They were using semi-automatic strike that. In this case, they were not using semi-automatic pistols. They were using semi-automatic revolvers. So it would be important to explain the differences between the two, because I would argue most people have probably seen more modern, and that's what he said in his opening. He was talking about modern style firearms. You're more likely to see a firearm like this or like the one that I just showed that was more modern than you're likely to see Western. So it's important to differentiate between those two so that the jury can have a more recent picture to connect and understand the differences. Okay, so that's important. I just want to just state that. Here we go.
The second type of round that is used on the sets are what's called dummy rounds. And these are a different story. Dummies look exactly like real bullets. As you can tell from kind of that main image there, although this evidence dummy round has some writing on it, you wouldn't be able to distinguish that from a live bullet if you were just looking at it with your eyes. And because these dummy rounds are designed to look exactly like live ammunition, every round has to be thoroughly checked before it is put inside of one of these firearms. Aside from sourcing firearms, blanks, and dummies for the movie, the next major function that Hannah was required to do on the movie set is that she was required to check every single one of these rounds to make sure that it's the appropriate blank or dummy and not live ammunition before it gets inserted into the gun. And there are two primary ways that an armorer or anybody who's familiar with this can check to make sure that a round is a dummy round. The first thing they can do is shake it. And if you'll see in that on the lower right-hand side, I've got a photograph for you there of a plastic container that's got 3 BBs in it. Those BBs are inside of that dummy round so that whenever you shake it, you can audibly hear that it's making a noise. And that way you know it's a dummy round. Sometimes they have a little spring in there rather than these bullets, but they always have some sort of noisemaker in there. The other way to distinguish a dummy from a real live bullet is in that top right photograph, and you'll see that cartridge has a hole drilled into the side of the casing. That's the second way that you can distinguish a dummy round from a live round. And then we have, not to overcomplicate things, but I think it's important that you know this, we also have some dummy rounds that are missing what's called the primer. Normally on a live cartridge, there's an explosive element that is inside of that center portion that whenever the hammer of the gun hits that primer, it causes a small spark that then ignites the rest of the gunpowder in the bullet and causes the projectile to be expelled.
Or you can use snap caps.
So dummy rounds, as you can see, they do look an awful lot like live ammunition, but there are ways, if you are careful, that you can distinguish a dummy round from a live round. The next major function of the armorer is to check the firearm before it is brought onto the set. And there's a very specific process that is used for this. When it's time for a firearm to be used, the armorer is required to present the firearm to the first assistant director to double check that only dummy rounds are inside the gun. And the armorer is also supposed to offer the actor who is receiving the gun the opportunity to also have the gun inspected in front of them. Unfortunately, in this case, Ms. Gutierrez did not always adhere to these safety procedures, and you're going to hear from several witnesses who will testify that she often rushed through this critical step and sometimes she skipped this check altogether. So let's turn to what happened on October 21st, 2021. The cast and crew of the Rust film were out at the Bonanza Creek Ranch, which is a ranch located just outside the city limits of Santa Fe. It's several thousand acres large, and it has an Old West style town that's built there, and often movies are filmed there. And I've got an example photo here.
So I want to pause right here, and I got it because I was going to kind of wait to say something. So I heard the prosecutor state that her duties as an armorer was to check the ammunition to make sure that it was dummy ammunition. He identified the type of ammunition where he identified blanks. He described and showed pictures that were demonstrative of what blanks are. He talked about the dummy ammunition where it could be a spring or some type of a little balled thing on the inside of the casing where if you shake it, you should be able to hear it or hear the spring. He also talked about the hole that's in the casing that identifies that it's a dummy round, given that this is not something you would want to have with live ammunition because the gunpowder would seep out and thus making it ineffective in certain cases. And then he talked about the dummy ammunition that has no primer in center fire rounds of ammunition. He said nothing about rim fire. Okay. Then he also talked about that when the armorer hands the firearm off, he or she is supposed to hand that firearm off to another person. Then he also said that it was alleged that she rushed through this to check to make sure that it was unloaded and that the right ammo was inside of it, and then to offer this up to the actor so that they can check it again. He also alleged that other people alleged that she rushed through the process and then in certain cases skipped this process. But you know what I did not hear him talk about? I did not hear him talk about any schooling that she may or may not have had that would authenticate, if I'm using the right word, whether or not she knew these procedures to be something that she was supposed to do and that it is standard practice for her to do that and that she deviated from this standard practice, right? Everything that we do is typically on paper that's outlined as professional firearms instructors. And, this is just firearms instructor. So she's not a firearms instructor. She's an armorer, and so it would be interesting to see if the defense brings this point up, that she was put in a role that she was not trained or was not trained the best at. That would be interesting to see if the defense makes that argument in their opening statements. And I didn't watch all of the defense opening statements. I watched part of it, and it got my gears grinding. So that's why I started this. So we're going to watch the opening arguments for the defense together. But let's go on ahead and continue in with this. Here we go.
To give you an idea of what the set looks like. It's nothing particularly fancy. It's just an Old West looking town. Part of the set, and this is located a little bit a ways from the town itself, is this church. And it was at this church that the incident resulting in Miss Hutchins' death occurred. The evidence is going to show that on October 21st, it was a fairly chaotic day on the set of the movie. The evening before, a group of camera operators who had some concerns about various safety issues on set sent an email to the production team indicating that they were going to be quitting. And so the next day, in response to this notice, the producers decided to push ahead with filming anyway, and they decided to use less camera equipment than what was normally used, and they tried to just improvise and make do with what they had. Filming on the morning of the 21st was largely uneventful. The cast and crew filmed several scenes without any particular incidents occurring. Leading up to the lunch hour, a small group of cast and crew were inside the church working on getting some close-up shots of Alec Baldwin sitting on a church pew and manipulating his revolver. That scene was completed just before lunch, and so they called for a lunch break.
Hold on, I want to hear that again. I want to hear that again.
Was called. I want you all to see what was going on, give you an idea of what the set looks like. It's nothing particularly fancy. It's just an Old West looking town. And crew filmed several scenes without any particular incidents occurring. Leading up to the lunch hour, a small group of cast and crew were inside the church working on getting some close-up shots of Alec Baldwin sitting on a church pew and manipulating his revolver. That scene was completed just before lunch, and so they called for a lunch break. And let me back up just a little bit. Before the lunch break was called, I want you all to see what was going on. This is so that gives you an idea of what was going on that morning. Alec Baldwin was sitting on a church pew, and he was practicing this draw from his holster with the camera crew kind of close up on top of him.
Was he pointing at the camera?
So they completed that scene and they called.
That's the question that I have. Was he pointing at the camera? Because if he was pointing at the camera, you see what I'm saying? How many of you all remember me saying that a long time ago, right? It is not uncommon for actors to point guns at the camera, which is in essence to point the gun at the cinematographer, because the cinematographer is behind the camera. So don't tell me, assume every firearm is loaded, point that firearm in a safe direction, keep your finger off the trigger, know your target and what lies beyond it. In the context of acting and in the context of filming, you're gonna violate these laws because you're filming. This is what grinds my gears when you got Second Amendment loving, got it. Alec Baldwin not liking, got it. Gun enthusiast, people who own and operate firearms, trying to relate that to acting or performing on a film set. Two different contexts, two different mindsets. Let's continue.
Called for the lunch hour to occur. So during the lunch hour, Ms. Gutierrez took the gun from Mr. Baldwin and she took it back to the safe, the gun safe that was loaded on a prop cart. Once lunch was over, the production decided that they wanted to continue working inside of the church. But at this point, they weren't actually filming anything like they were in this video that I just showed you. And instead, they were doing what's called a blocking. And that is, in film terms, what you do before you even get to a rehearsal. So it's like a very rough rehearsal where the lighting director, the camera operator, and all of the folks are trying to get things situated so that they can then move into a rehearsal. Whenever a blocking is going on, because they aren't filming, there's really no need for the actor to have a live firearm in their hands, or even for the live firearm to be on set. You're going to hear from several witnesses, or from one witness in particular, who's going to testify that for purposes of blocking, Mr. Baldwin could have been using a stick, a rubber gun, anything that would essentially allow him to mimic a gun. It didn't have to be a live firearm. On that day, though, the defendant was asked to provide Mr. Baldwin with a live firearm for the blocking, and she did, and that was within her discretion to do so. You're going to hear that on the day of the shooting, Ms. Gutierrez loaded the gun in the morning with 5 rounds. The revolver, though, is a 6-shooter, so it can hold 6 rounds, but in that morning, she only was able to load 5 of them. After the lunch break was over, Ms. Gutierrez retrieved the gun from the safe, and she cleaned that 6th hole and was able to put a 6th round into the 6th slot. Ms. Gutierrez then took the firearm to the church and handed the gun over to the first assistant director, whose name is Dave Halls. Ms. Gutierrez and Mr. Halls then did a sloppy and incomplete safety check of the gun, where the dummy rounds were not removed from the gun and rattled or checked to see if they had a hole drilled in it. Instead, she just kind of cracked open the gun and partially spun the cylinder to show Mr. Halls a few of the rounds, but they were not removed from the gun and they weren't all checked.
That's it, because they're only looking at the casing. You only look at the primer. And see, the thing is,
after the incident happened,
and during that, even if you spun the cylinder, because it's not like a revolver, and I have a revolver here. It's not like a revolver where with an actual revolver, you have the cylinder that swings out like this. It's not like this where you have the cylinder that swings out. Okay. With a semi-automatic single action, I want to say semi-automatic, but a single action revolver, that's what I meant to say. Okay. The cylinder didn't swing out. Instead, there was a little piece back here and it flipped out a little bit, and you would just spin the cylinder. You could still look at each one of these are called chambers. You can still look at the back of the round itself and see if there's a primer there. You can still look at the back. Like, this is a live round, okay? And you can still look at the back and see if there's a primer there, right? But it makes sense to take the rounds out, to inspect them, shake them, and see what they're made of. It's not hard to do. It's just not hard to do. So, yes, that was recklessness on her part. Let's continue.
Was being interviewed by the investigating officers. She stated that when she removed the gun from the safe to begin the filming for the afternoon session, she didn't recheck the ammunition. So when she pulled the gun out and put the 6th bullet in, she didn't independently check the rounds at that time either. Our witnesses are going to testify that when the defendant pulled the gun out of the safe after lunch, what she should have done was open the gun and independently herself.
Okay. Sorry about that.
She took it to the church and handed it to Mr. Halls. She should have done a second complete.
Now, in fairness, I'm wondering, did she make all, I won't say in fairness, but did she make all of these statements in the presence of a lawyer? I'm curious, did she make all these statements in the presence of a lawyer? Because she's doing a lot of doggone talking and a lot of doggone incriminating herself with all these statements that she's telling investigators. If she would have talked to a lawyer, would the lawyer have told her, oh, yeah, go on ahead and tell them this stuff because it's not going to incriminate you. This is definitely incriminating statements that she's making. You didn't check. You're going to knowingly let your client state that she didn't check them? This is why it's important. I'm telling you, look, this is why it is important, importante, that you get a doggone lawyer. You better get a lawyer because I'm telling you, saying something 1,000 times is not the same thing as living it once. You can say when you're not under pressure that you're not going to talk to the police. And then you get in that box, which is what we call the interrogation room. And under the influence of that stress that you're going through, you end up talking. Ohio versus Rayner, 532 U.S. 17, 2001. The United States Supreme Court held, look, yeah, guilty persons use the Fifth Amendment and don't say that, they don't sit here. They cite the Fifth Amendment and state they're not going to talk. But the purpose of the Fifth Amendment is also to protect you, the alleged innocent person, right, from making innocent statements that could otherwise provide the government a causal connection that can be evidence used against you. Y'all better get an attorney. Let's continue. Here we go.
Ammo check with Mr. Halls because this double redundancy is what helps prevent the kind of incidents that occurred to Miss Hutchins from happening. This means she should have opened the gun, removed each cartridge, confirmed that they were dummy rounds by individually shaking them, rattling them, or seeing the board whole. And because these dummy rounds are so similar to live rounds, her decision to just crack it open and spin the cylinder a little bit to look at the head stamps wasn't enough. She needed to do a much more complete check.
Agreed.
So having failed to do that check herself, she then handed the firearm to Mr. Halls anyway. She exited the church, and then Mr. Halls handed the firearm to Mr. Baldwin. As the blocking session was underway, Miss Hutchins and several of her crewmates were busily working, looking through and adjusting cameras, and Mr. Baldwin was sitting on that church pew practicing how he would hold the gun for the upcoming filming session. As Mr. Baldwin was manipulating the firearm, he caused it to discharge, and that unfortunately sent a projectile flying directly at Miss Hutchins. The projectile shot completely through Miss Hutchins and then struck the film's director, Joel Souza, in the shoulder.
Okay, I got a question. This sixth round, hold on. At this point, at first,
the set paramedic.
At first, she had 5 rounds in the At first, she had 5 rounds in the gun. She could not get the 6th round in there. She cleaned it, and then she added another round in there prior to giving it to the first director, who did a crappy job of checking it after she did a crappy job of checking it, and then they handed it to Mr. Baldwin. What type of round was that 6th round? And how did she set the cylinder? Valid question. I hope they addressed that. They asked her all those questions. Here we go.
Was called into the church and began life-saving efforts on both Miss Hutchins and Mr. Souza. Another crew member who was in the church called 911 to report the shooting and to seek additional medical assistance. But because of the ranch's remote location, it took some time before additional medical personnel arrived. And this additional support also included a life flight helicopter for Miss Hutchins. A team of medical personnel worked to stabilize her, and they placed her on the life flight to UNMH. But sadly, the personnel at UNMH were unable to overcome the injuries that she sustained, and she was pronounced deceased at UNMH. We will show you, ladies and gentlemen, but that by failing to make those vital safety checks, the defendant acted negligently and without due caution, and that the decisions she made that day ultimately contributed to Ms. Hutchins' death. So that's what happened on the 21st. But now I want to talk to you a little bit about what happened leading up to the 21st. There are some other ways that Ms. Gutierrez was negligent on the set. We intend to call several witnesses to give testimony that she regularly failed to properly carry out her duties as an armorer. These witnesses are going to describe the defendant's conduct as unprofessional and sloppy. You will hear testimony that she routinely left guns and ammunition lying around the set unattended, and that her gun safe and ammo cart were constantly disorganized. The second question that we want to answer for you is where these live bullets came from. The prospect of live ammunition landing up on a film set is incomprehensible. It's something that should never happen.
Agreed.
It's a hard and fast industry rule that live ammunition should be miles away from a film set at all times because of the risk that it poses for being confused with the dummy rounds that are used on the set. I'm showing you a picture now of a box of ammunition that Miss Gutierrez says she was pulling cartridges from and loading into Mr. Baldwin's firearm on the day the fatal shooting occurred. If you can see the arrow that I'm kind of wiggling around here, this is the box of ammunition that she was pulling from. This is a box of dummies. This box here is a box of blanks. So these are the kind of rounds that will pop and create smoke. These are the type of rounds that are just supposed to be completely inert. When the officers arrived on the set after the shooting, this cart is where those two boxes of ammunition were first found. When the officer who was in charge of this prop cart uncovered that the boxes on there were the ones that were being used for that day's filming, he then placed them into his police unit, and that's what you saw in those previous slides. These are the boxes of ammunition inside of a cop car. Eventually, the box of dummies was taken back to the Santa Fe Sheriff's Office, where it was inventoried and photographed by a crime scene technician whose name is Marissa Popple, and she's going to be a witness in this case. The first box of dummies that was opened up is what is on your monitors right now. This is a styrofoam container that has approximately 37 cartridges in it. According to the label on the outside of the box, these are supposed to be dummy cartridges. And I don't know if you've noticed yet, but there is one of these cartridges that doesn't look like the others. It's that one with the red square.
Yes. Well,
you can see that it has a silver primer.
Yeah.
Whereas all of the other ones have brass primers.
Yep.
The cartridge in that red box is a live bullet.
Wow.
This was another live bullet that was found on the set.
Bro.
Not just the one that was in Mr. Baldwin's firearm.
How did that happen?
Ultimately, you're going to hear from us that there were not just these two, but a total of 6 live bullets that were found on the set. 6. You're also going to hear that all 6 of those live rounds have the same, have common characteristics of having this silver or nickel covered primer,
Right.
a shiny brass casing,
Wow.
and what's called a starline brass head stamp. I don't know if you can tell in your monitors or not, but this impression that is on each of these cartridges, it looks like a star and then a line and a star. That indicates that it's a starline brass manufactured casing. So we knew from the evidence gathered on October 21st, and when we had these rounds examined by the FBI, we discovered that there were actually those 6 live rounds on set. And so our next step was to determine whether there was any way, if we could tell when those live rounds ended up on the set.
I wanted the manufacturer.
So we began to comb through all of the photos and videos that had been recorded on the set from the very first day of the filming began. And we started to notice something. We were able to identify several points in time where the cartridges with a silver primer and a shiny brass cartridge ended up being spotted inside of the gun belts and bandoliers that the cast members were wearing on the set.
Oh, it could have been. Oh,
in fact,
geez.
We found a photograph where there was one occasion where a live round was sitting right on Miss Gutierrez's lap, and she failed to identify it.
But this is a training issue for me.
What you're looking at now is a photograph of Miss Gutierrez, and on her lap in the lower right-hand corner, you can see that styrofoam casing holder. I'm going to show you a call out that's been enhanced a little bit. And you can see, I hope you can see on your monitors, that these bullets here kind of on the top right appear to have a brass casing, but at least these other 2 bullets, most definitely this cartridge that's in the blue circle, you can see that there is a silver primer on that cartridge. And we believe that was a live bullet sitting on her lap, and she failed to identify it.
When you say failed, I'm curious about her training. I'm really curious about that.
It's important that you know that this photograph was taken on October 10th. And the reason it's important for you to make note that this photograph was taken on October 10th is because the other dummy rounds that were purchased for this movie didn't even arrive to the set until October 12th. So this means that the live ammunition could not have been from the shipment that came in on October 12th and that belonged or that was supplied by somebody other than Ms. Gutierrez. This also will help you when you hear from the defendant's counsel, who are likely going to suggest to you that there was some kind of sabotage on afoot on the set, or that the live rounds came from someone other than Ms. Gutierrez. This photograph, we think, will help you conclude that the live rounds were on set on the 10th, and that the other dummy rounds didn't arrive until the 12th. We also have a little bit more evidence that these live rounds came onto the set via the defendant when she came to New Mexico from out of state. As you can see from this photo, this is the box of rounds. This is kind of a blown up photograph of the box of rounds that she was pulling from on the day of the shooting. And you can see that it has a very specific label on it. It says 45 long Colt dummies. And then in much smaller print there in the middle, you can see the initials JS. So on November 9th, a couple of weeks after the shooting, The defendant came into the Santa Fe Sheriff's Office for an interview with Corporal Hancock, and she was asked questions about the box of ammunition she was pulling from the day of the incident, this box with the small JS on the label. The defendant told Corporal Hancock that she thought this box was kind of peculiar and she wasn't certain where it came from, but she said that she didn't believe it was one of the boxes that was originally brought on set. But then the defendant offered to Corporal Hancock that the day prior to the interview, she had asked her father back home to text her a photograph of the box of 45 long Colt dummies that they had at his home. And she texted him, and he texted her this photo in response. It's identical. It's the same box. The box of dummies she was pulling from on the 21st is identical to the box of dummies that her father had at home. So we believe this is more evidence that this box of dummies with the live round in it came from the defendant.
Where's our lawyer?
We're also going to show you how these live rounds slowly spread their way throughout the set, eventually landing in several of the actors' costumes and firearms on October 13th, 15th, 17th, and of course on the 21st. In the image on your screen now, you can see in the large photograph, that's the bandolier that Mr. Baldwin was wearing on the 21st. There is a live round inside of that bandolier. The black belt that's in the lower right-hand corner is a belt that was worn by another cast member. There's a live round in that belt too.
Wow.
The evidence you're going to hear throughout this trial is that the defendant was unprofessional and that she failed to do the essential safety functions of her job.
I still don't hear no training
and
though.
These failures resulted in live ammunition being spread throughout this entire set. Once the live ammunition was on the set, she failed to detect it.
Here's what I didn't hear. Here's what I didn't hear. And I gotta point this out. I didn't hear the prosecution say that after photographing that ammo, they then took at a ballistics laboratory or whatever at a forensic science center. I didn't hear them say they took the live cartridge from the bandolier, loaded it into that, and test fired to see if in fact it was a live round. I mean, okay, well, you sit there and say, well, Mike, come on now. Do you really need to know that there's a huge difference between this live round where you can tell it's a hollow point 38 caliber, right, with the primer in the back, and then this snap cap, which looks the same, but it's not the same because this has a look. You should have. I would have liked to have seen that. I would have liked to have seen that. Let's continue. Maybe I'm doing too much. Here we go.
Follow those essential safety protocols that required her to inspect every round before they were placed into the gun. The evidence will show that the defendant treated the safety protocols as if they were optional rather than if people's lives counted on her doing her job correctly.
But was she trained?
We will show you that as a direct result of her failures, Ms. Gutierrez caused Ms. Hutchins' death. The last, or I should say the second crime that Ms. Gutierrez has been charged with is tampering with evidence. The evidence with regard to this charge is a lot simpler. You're going to hear testimony that on the day that Ms. Hutchins was killed, and after the defendant left her interview at the sheriff's office, she went back to her hotel. Knowing that the defendant had probably been through a lot that day, one of her crewmates went to her room to check on her to see how she was doing. And after they were done visiting, the crew member got up to leave, And as she was walking out of the room, the defendant handed her something and asked her to hang on to it for her. At first, this crew member didn't really realize what she had been handed, so she walked out of the room, started down the hallway, and when she looked into her hand, she realized she had been handed a baggie of suspected cocaine from the defendant.
No.
She will testify that she was surprised that the defendant, who was somebody she hardly knew, would hand her a bag of suspected cocaine to hang on to for her. The crew member is going to testify that she disposed of the cocaine. She didn't want to be caught with it, so she just threw it away. And you're going to hear that the defendant over the next several weeks texted this crew member several times asking her to return her stuff, which the crew member is going to testify is in reference to the baggie of cocaine. I know I've gone through a lot of information with you guys, and I hope you're not too overwhelmed, but that's where we're going to spend the next couple of weeks with you going over all of this evidence in a lot more detail. You're going to hear from a multitude of law enforcement officers. You're going to hear from firearms experts. You're going to hear from 4 FBI analysts covering the topics of fingerprints, DNA, explosives comparisons, and firearms testing. You're going to hear from an image enhancement expert. And most importantly, you're going to hear from witnesses who worked with Ms. Gutierrez every day on the movie set, including the film's director and several of the crew members who were inside the church on the day of this horrific incident. We're confident that after you hear from these witnesses and after you have an opportunity to look at the evidence for yourself in greater detail, you will agree with us that the defendant's actions were not only negligent on October 21st, but on many days leading up to the 21st. We hope that after you review this information, you will find her guilty of involuntary manslaughter. And after reviewing and hearing from the witness concerning the tampering charge, we believe that you will also convict her on the tampering with evidence charge as well. I'm about done, but I do want to leave you with one final statement. And this is a statement that Ms. Gutierrez made when she was being interviewed on the day of the shooting.
Why?
She says at the end, I don't know. I wish I would have checked it more. And so do we. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. Before we take yours, I think we'll take a bathroom break. Okay.
So, yeah, we're going to go on ahead and get to the defense opening. What are your thoughts? Sound off in the comments what you think about this. Yeah, it's troublesome. It really is. But now I want to go on ahead and get to the defense opening because there are some. I don't want to preface it. Let's just go right into it because, and I'm going to tell you, I'm going to end up stopping and starting through this. So let's go. And she looks different. Doesn't she look like what's the girl's name from Hunger Games? Doesn't she look like her right now?
You may be seated.
Yeah.
Mr. Bowles?
Thank you, Your Honor. May it please the court, counsel, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we are privileged, our team, to represent Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, who's sitting over here. And we're here because of a tragedy. There's no doubt. There was a tragic occurrence on that movie set. But let me tell you something you already know. Just because there was a tragedy does not mean that a crime was committed. It does not mean that Hannah Gutierrez-Reed caused the crimes they have charged her with. And we are going to, through the course of this case, show you that production and the state have both very early on sought to make Hannah Gutierrez-Reed a scapegoat. That's what this is about. You're going to hear that this tragedy, several unconnected events, independent events had to happen to create it. First, the first event that had to happen is the actor, Alec Baldwin, pointed a gun on that set, and he either had his finger on the trigger and the hammer cocked, or he pulled the trigger as he was pointing that at Miss Hutchins and Mr. Souza, who was right behind her. And make no mistake, this is not a prop gun. This is a real gun. Mr. Baldwin pointed it right at him, either had his finger on the trigger and depressed, or pulled it, causing.
So here's the problem that I got with that argument. Let's just say you got your kid who, you leave the car, car door open, right? You're in the drive-through of your house, leave the car door open, and the kids get in the car and they get behind the steering wheel, the driver's side, right? Driver's side front. And their feet are just long enough to be able to touch the gas, and they're pressing the gas pedal and they're pressing the brake, and then they're pressing the gas pedal and then they're pressing the brake. Just because you're pressing the gas pedal and you're pressing the brake, that doesn't mean the car is going anywhere. Why? Because one, it has not been started because there's no key or no fob, and the car hasn't been started and it hasn't been put into gear. So for this defense attorney to sit there and say, well, let's make the first step, and that was Alec Baldwin touched the trigger of the gun. And that right there, he was pointing it. And that right there is the first thing. Okay, well, I submit to you, CZP-10, mag out, round out, right? Here we go. No mag in the well, no round in chamber. Mag out, round out. Here we go. We can do this all day. We can do this all day. But not for this. Matter of fact, here. You can do this all day. If it doesn't have ammo in it, you got nothing. Let's continue. Let's continue.
Using that gun to fire and hit Miss Hutchins. That's the first thing that had to happen. Miss Gutierrez-Reed, you're not going to hear anything about her being in that church or firing that weapon. That was Alec Baldwin. You will hear that Hollywood actors are not allowed to point guns, real guns, at other actors or crew. It's like every other safety with guns in any other place.
Has he seen hood movies? Actors point guns at other actors all the time. So how are Hollywood actors, not crew, maybe, context, cinematographers, yes, because if you want to get that live shot, right, here we go. Prop gun, blank pistol, here we go. Pointing the gun, listen, you sit there right now and, right? We went through this already. This is a blank pistol. It's plugged, so nothing will even come through. I'm not going to tell you what. Say it one more time in its own. Say it again. And the cinematographer is like, that's what happens on movie sets. Come on. All right, let's go. Let's get back to it. Oh.
Society. You learn these rules and go into the classes. You learn these rules. If you've ever owned a gun, Rule number 1, never point a firearm at somebody unless you intend to shoot them.
Not the same context. This is not a self-defense situation. This is not the handling of a firearm outside of the movie set. I would argue that the rules are different in certain context. Most situations, yes, he would be 1,000% correct. Not on a movie set. In context.
And that rule was broken. And that's going to be the first thing you're going to hear that caused this tragic accident. The second thing is that Hannah is being made a scapegoat for are deliberate errors and mistakes by production. So the opening, counsel for the state talked about Ms. Gutierrez-Reed and tried to put all of the onus on her. At the time, she was 24 years old. She's been hired for 2 duties, a props assistant, and you're going to hear what that is, and the armorer role. 2 different duties. So they were splitting her between those and making her, for example, roll cowboy cigarettes. That was one of them for the movie, and they had props that the actors have. And so she was having to do that to take away from her armorer duties. You're going to hear about that. Now,
do you know how bad of an argument that is? Do you know what I do in my business? Not only am I the firearms instructor, right? I also load ammunition. I also handle the firearms. I also render them safe, right? We also make sure they know how to load the firearms. So I'm supervising that. I'm also maintaining order and discipline within the class. There are a lot of times where I have to task switch. A lot of times where I have to task switch. And that's what it's called, task switching, where you perform it to the level of automaticity to where it's easy for you to task switch because you know what you're doing with each thing. So she's 24 years old. Well, I got in the military when I was 17, handling firearms earlier than that. I became a police officer at 25. I was in law enforcement at what, 24? So what's your point? You say someone who's that young can't be trained. Now, I hope he's going to get to that in his opening, because it's the one thing I did not hear the state talk about is, was she trained and knowingly violated standard practices? Let's continue.
OSHA is a New Mexico agency, and that New Mexico agency inspected the movie and investigated this shooting after the shooting. You're going to hear that OSHA found fault with production. They found numerous faults, numerous mistakes on production's part, not Ms. Gutierrez-Reed on production. You're going to hear that OSHA indicated that there was a rush set, that there were several safety errors, and I'm going to talk about those in a moment, but I want to make that very clear. When the state talks about Ms. Gutierrez-Reed being negligent, what really happened is production was negligent. Production put her in that position. They put her in the position of having 2 jobs, a props assistant and an armorer, and expected a 24-year-old under really tough conditions to keep up with everything that was going on.
Bull.
You're going to hear about that.
Bull. Those were really tough conditions. Stop. These are bad arguments.
You're going to hear that Ms. Gutierrez-Reed emailed the production manager, Gabrielle Pickle, who was on this set. You're going to hear Gabrielle Pickle. And she asked her for more armorer days. She said in this email, when I'm not able to focus on my armorer duties, this is when mistakes happen. And she was telling her this. Now, Ms. Pickle came back and said, no, we only have 8 armorer days, and that's all you're going to get. So out of the whole course of the movie, they didn't allow her to be an armorer and to perform those duties to the extent that she had to. And that's going to be a very important point, too. They moved her between 2 different things, props assistant and armor. Counsel for the state in his opening said that Ms. Gutierrez-Reed had the job of sourcing the ammo and sourcing the firearms. on set. Now you're going to hear when you go through this about another name, and her name is Sarah Zachary. Sarah Zachary was the props head. So as the head of props department, she was Miss Gutierrez-Reed's boss. In that role, Sarah Zachary had to source the ammunition and had to source the firearms. So that was not correct, what counsel stated in the opening. In reality, that was Sarah Zachary's job. Now you're going to hear that what happened is those two worked together in conjunction. Hannah was, Miss Gutierrez-Reed was supposed to be doing armor, and then she was supposed to run over and help Sarah Zachary whenever she wanted the help on props.
That just weakens your argument. That just weakens your argument. Because earlier you said that she had two jobs and that the prosecution said she had two jobs too. But then you said, no, they were incorrect, that this other person had the job of props. So then that takes away one of the jobs from your client, meaning that she had the primary job of armorer and the secondary job, if she had the space available to be able to do that, a props assistant. So that would make the state's case stronger. You just weakened your opening argument. Let's continue. Let's continue.
Well, a lot of what you're going to hear is a chaotic scene created by production and forcing somebody to do these two different roles. You're going to hear witnesses in this case, including professional armorer that the state has hired and other people that'll tell you it's completely inadvisable and a terrible decision on a movie like this with so many guns that you have a part-time armorer. It just is not a good idea. And that's a terrible idea, but that's what they did. Now, as counsel stated, you will hear that this scene in the church was a blocking. It was a getting ready for a rehearsal. So you're going to hear that Miss Gutierrez-Reed had brought the gun to Mr. Halls, that Mr. Halls never should have handled that weapon. And you're going to see he had a lot of experience in movies. He knew better. He had the weapon. He did not inspect that fully. And you're going to see that Mr. Baldwin didn't inspect it at all. So when counsel showed you that video on the first part of it, when he's sitting in that pew and doing that cross draw, you're going to hear about that. You're going to hear how dangerous a seated cross draw is. It's one of the more dangerous draws you can do because you're pulling the weapon across your body, and you can also pull it across other people.
What?
So you're going to hear that Miss Gutierrez-Reed specifically requested to train Mr. Baldwin in a cross draw. You're also going to hear that he did not
train her in a train. Miss Gutierrez requested to train Alec Baldwin in a cross draw, implying that she was trained to train. Now, I could see in a cross draw muzzling other people. I could see that. Doesn't necessarily make it. I think we're adding a level of danger that is momentary. Very momentary. I think that's a stretch. But I think they did themselves in with she requested to train him. Because remember, my argument was, how was she trained? Please, let's continue.
not do that training. He did not set that training up. So when this tragic shooting occurred, it was in the very motion of a cross draw. You're also going to hear that this scene, this blocking, didn't even require him to draw that weapon. So it's just going to be an extreme close-up scene of his hand pulling out of his holster. And they were going to focus on that, create tension in the scene in the movie. Instead, for whatever reason, Mr. Baldwin pulled it out, and it ends up being pointed right at Miss Hutchins, the camera, and Mr. Souza.
It doesn't.
You're also going to hear, we're going to talk about in the course of this case, there's Hollywood tricks. These guns should never be pointed at another person. That instead, what
That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. That doesn't matter. Here we go. I should have never loaded this. That doesn't matter because here we go. No mag in the well, no round in the chamber, right? Here we go. So let's go. We can do this all day. We don't have no ammo in the gun. We can do this all day. Nothing happens. No one dies. Bad argument. Bad argument. Bad argument. Bad argument. But not for the ammo in the gun. Miss Hutchins would still be alive. Bad argument. Bad argument. Let's continue.
What happened is there's camera tricks that you can use to make it look like it's pointed, but it's not. There's also things we're going to talk about that Mr. Baldwin did at that moment that he violated, and safety rules. Our gun and ammunition expert, Mr. Kuski, who you're going to hear from, is going to discuss safe gun handling and usage and go through safety bulletins. These safety bulletins apply on this set to movie actors, and he's going to talk about that. Second, let me talk about the live rounds. Now, the state has a relatively new theory, which is based totally on pictures. And you saw some of those pictures. And it's also based on the idea that live rounds have a silver primer on this set. So that's going to be the core of their argument and their theory. And you saw in the picture, one of them had a silver primer. And the primer is just that circle in the middle of the round on the back where the hammer hits, and that's what caused the round to fire. Now, what you didn't hear in state's opening was that.
Let's talk about that. Okay, let's pause that and let's talk about that. Here, you've got 2 9mm rounds of ammunition. 2 9mm rounds of ammunition. Both of them are hollow points. Okay, let's look at the primer. This is the primer right here. Let me fix this screen. Right, there we go. This is the primer right here, right? This one is colored silver or whatever. I would say silver. And this one is colored brass. They're both live rounds of ammunition. The state is not arguing that all live rounds are colored silver. They're distinguishing within that box in their opening argument, which I kind of didn't hear. I heard the opening argument, but I would imagine in trial, they will have people testify to how they know and are able to differentiate the difference between the dummy rounds and the live rounds with more than just this, but how they knew, or Hannah Gutierrez-Reed knew that the silver rounds within that box of ammo were live rounds. The state isn't saying all live rounds are only silver. I think they're specifying within that particular box.
There's going to be numerous dummy rounds that also have silver primers that were on this set.
That would be something to see.
There was a FBI report you're going to see that a box removed from the prop truck had 16 silver primer dummies and 1 silver primer suspected live round.
Okay.
So this was a box found in the prop truck. So the theory that all the silver primer rounds are live is not correct.
Okay.
It's just not true.
Okay.
So you're going to hear during the course of this evidence, because of these silver primer dummies, that theory does not work. Second, you're going to hear that Rust Production ordered all the dummies on set. Rust Production sourced these primarily from a man named Seth Kinney. Seth Kinney owned PDQ Props. PDQ Props was the primary supplier to the Rust set. Now you're going to hear that after the shooting, Seth Kinney was extremely active in contacting the sheriffs and trying to work with them and trying to point the finger away from himself. And you're going to hear about that. You're also going to hear that Sarah Zachary, who I told you about earlier, after the shooting, she sent a text to Seth Kinney and it said emergency. Now, Sarah Zachary works for Seth Kinney on PDQ Props. She worked on set, but she was under him. She sent a text to Seth Kinney saying emergency. You're then going to hear that they had a phone call very shortly after. This is just minutes after the shooting. Sarah and Seth are talking on the phone. Now, we don't have that actual phone call, but whatever was said, here's what happened the very next thing. Sarah Zachary goes over and removes rounds from two of the weapons, two of the actors' guns, and she throws them away. Now, that's absolute and complete scene tampering. And when she first was interviewed by the sheriff, Sarah Zachary said, "I was panicked, and that's all I can tell you." Now, I expect in the course of this case, you're going to hear that when she was interviewed, she's going to say something like, "I threw them away because that's what we do after scenes." And you're going to get to evaluate her credibility and determine, why would these be thrown away? If they're dummy rounds, they're rounds that can be reused. They cost money. It doesn't make sense. You would just throw them away. And what was the real reason Sarah Zachary threw those rounds away right after her call with Seth Kinney? Now, you're also going to hear that right after the shooting, Sarah Zachary went over and she shook some rounds and determined that they didn't shake, meaning she felt like they were live rounds. So then she throws these away. Now, they're thrown in trash. She tells law enforcement, but on that day, they don't find them.
So,
but they're on a.
Here's the problem that I have with this. I gotta interject. Here we go. This is gonna be. Here we go. So, I got my Bodyguard 38 right here, and you can see the action is open, the cylinder, and the chambers are exposed. You can clearly see that it's unloaded. Okay. Here are my speed loaders, right? Here are my speed loaders right here. And here are, matter of fact, we're going to make this even more interesting. Okay. Here are my speed loaders. And then here are the speed loaders of the dummy rounds, right? Speed loaders, dummy, speed loaders, live, right? Here's the revolver. Cylinder open, action open, right? If these are not near these, and you do this, hold on, try to get in the camera, and you do this, nothing happens except the mechanical functions of the revolver. The cylinder cycles to the next available chamber before the firing pin strikes what would be the back of the primer. Let's do some more science. I'm a Force Science analyst. Here we go. Certified Force Science Institute. Right? Here we go. And it's don't even take all that. Live rounds. Dummies. If these don't go near this and this happens, and that happens, or that happens. Nothing happens except the mechanical functions of the pistol operate. Again, I don't care if some nefarious person snuck on set and brought live rounds. Before you hand that gun to Alec Baldwin, an actor, hold on, Alec. We check to make sure that the firearm is unloaded. We check to make sure that there's a difference between live ammunition. This is definitely live. Shouldn't even be on set. Cut, stop. Hold on, everybody. Alec, all due respect, stop action. Hey, grab all this. I don't know how this live ammo got in here. Get this off the set immediately. Alec, I get it. Before we do anything, this has got to go. I'm looking out for you. It's got to go. Fire me today for saving you. Gotta go. Then once that's done, now we can do the checks of the lab. No live ammo's gone. Dummy ammo. All right. Check again. Matter of fact, Helena, record me doing this. Check. Y'all see the cylinders open. Y'all see it? Got it. Here we go. Come on. It's no excuse. But not for the ammo being where it was not supposed to be. We wouldn't even be here. Let's continue.
Trash right by the prop truck, you're going to hear, but they didn't find them. So we don't have those rounds. And you're not going to be able to hear this in the course of this case or see what Sarah Zachary threw away. You're not going to be able to have that because they were never recovered. That's scene tampering. You're also going to hear another instance of scene tampering, that Sarah Zachary carried items from the prop cart. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that prop cart. Right after the shooting, she carried items to the prop truck. So she moved items from the cart, knowing there had been a shooting, knowing law enforcement's going to be here, to the prop truck. So the other problem with the state's theory now, and showing you that picture of those boxes in Benavides' truck and how they were kept on the seat, is that we don't know what was taken from the cart completely. What we do know is that one box, Seth Kinney's box, appeared and was found in the prop truck. And we know that Sarah Zachary transported items from the prop cart to the prop truck. We know that. But we're never going to know exactly what was on that cart at the time of the shooting.
And none of that matters.
Because it was tampered with.
None of that matters.
We're also not going to know, because you're going to see on Officer Benavides' lapel video, that right after the shooting, Miss Gutierrez-Reed was taken into his vehicle and segregated. She was segregated from all the other witnesses. She's sitting in his vehicle. Officer Benavides Deputy Benavides feels like he has to stay with Miss Gutierrez-Reed because she's distraught. So he tells another person to go get the prop cart. The prop cart is over by the church. He tells somebody else to walk over and get it. Now, I think he's going to acknowledge that he should have gone and got that prop cart. Problem with that is this is just a random, this is not a law enforcement, not random, we know who it is, but this is law enforcement's job to secure the scene. After a shooting like this, you don't want evidence to go walking away. You don't want it to go missing. You don't want it, because we're here on a reasonable doubt standard. That standard is the highest standard under our law. That means you can't convict somebody in this country, no matter who they are, unless you prove the case beyond a reasonable doubt. And what we've got here is theories based on evidence that has already been tampered with. And you're going to hear that in this case. That's not even going to be questioned. So you're going to have to take the leap that whatever Sarah took to the prop truck, we don't know. And whatever she did with those rounds, we don't know. And you may not know why. But I can tell you, it occurred right after the call with Seth Kenney. And you're going to hear about that. You're going to hear about his contacts with a witness named Del Reed. Del Reed is the father of Miss Gutierrez-Reed. Del Reed is one of the most renowned armorers in the history of movies. You're going to hear that he's been doing this for over 50 years. He's trained Brad Pitt, Sharon Stone, Denzel Washington. He did Tombstone. Some of you might have seen that. He did 3:10 to Yuma. He's the real deal. And you're going to hear that he trained Miss Gutierrez-Reed. She was very well trained. She also went to film school, and she completed a bachelor's degree in that. So you're going to see that she was trained, she was educated, and she was ready for this job. Now, it was her second job as head armorer. You're going to hear that she had one prior, and then she had also worked as an assistant on another movie. But you're going to hear that from the time she was a little girl, her dad, Del Reed, had her on these movie sets, and he was training her. Now, Thel, the reason why I mention him is
That's
is
not
he
a
and
better
Seth
argument.
Kenney,
That's actually going
right
to hurt that's hurting your argument, because if in fact she had all this experience and she knew, why didn't she check? Why didn't she check?
before Russ started, we're on another movie set called Yellowstone 1883, and that occurred in Texas. You're going to hear that Thel Reed brought live rounds. These were 45 Colt live rounds to Texas, and he and Seth Kenney were going to train the actors on a range, not on the set, but on a range. So they sometimes train these actors to fire the weapon and see how the recoil is and kind of get a feel for it for the movie scene. So he brought these live rounds. They did the training. They did Yellowstone 83. And then Seth Kenney kept these live rounds in an ammo can. He did not give them back to Thel Reed. And again, you're going to see these were 45 Colt live rounds. Fast forward. Wasn't that much longer, within months, that we have Russ set. And Seth Kenney is the primary supplier of ammunition to the Russ set. You're going to see evidence in this case that Seth Kenney's rounds in a box that the sheriffs found were blued. They were a certain color. And we'll remind you, as we go through, we'll highlight that, but they were a certain color. And you're going to see, for example, on the picture that the state showed you in their opening, the live round they said that was in that gun belt, it's the same color. And you're going to be able to put that together as the evidence comes through. It's the same color as the rounds that Seth had that were blued. You're also going to hear that the sheriff's investigation, they never took Seth Kenney's fingerprints. They never took his DNA. They didn't take his cell phone. So again, we're going to be missing evidence. Knowing that Seth Kenney was the primary ammunition supplier, knowing that he and Sarah Zachary had talked right after the shooting, Sarah had thrown rounds away, Sarah had moved stuff from the prop truck, none of Seth Kenney's phone, fingerprints, or DNA were taken. And you're also going to hear that there was no request to the FBI to check those live rounds for fingerprints or DNA. None.
That doesn't matter.
So the FBI lab was...
If she would have checked, how do you overcome the state saying that she had 5 rounds in there? She then cleaned one of the chambers, took a 6th round in there, or put a 6th round in the chamber, closed whatever the little piece is, I don't know, right? And then handed it back to Alec or whomever, first director, and then to Alec for the first shot to be the shot. That's the real shot. I heard nothing on that. Let's continue. Maybe he's got more in his opening. Let's go.
Requested to do a bunch of forensic tests. They were testing the firearm Mr. Baldwin used to see if it functioned correctly. You're going to hear about other tests they did, but no testing on the live rounds. 0. Again, that's going to be evidence that you are never going to see or have because the government didn't do it. And again, we have a reasonable doubt standard.
I don't know.
Our expert, Mr. Kuski, is going to talk about the government's theory, state's theory, about these colors and the rounds. And I talked about that earlier briefly, but I'm just going to say it again because it's so important. You cannot tell a live round from a dummy by a picture. And the reason for that is that the dummies are made in Hollywood to look just like live rounds. Now, that the point of that is the people watching the movie don't know.
That picture that he showed of the one without the primer or the one with the distinct hole in the casing, that's different from a live round. Here's a live round of ammunition right here. A live revolver round. You don't see any hole in the casing. Why? Because of what's in here. You kind of can't hear it, but sometimes you kind of can. There's gunpowder in here, so you don't want to have a hole because then it comes out and renders this ineffective. That's what he said. There's 3 types of dummy ammunition. There's the crimped, where the bullet, where there would be a bullet, is crimped. Then he said there's one where there's a hole in the casing, where when you shake it, you hear the rattle because it's like 3 small little pellets. And then you got one that has no primer. That's it. That's what he said. Matter of fact, let me walk over and see, because I used to have some of those rounds. I used to have some of those where it's just where the primer is not in there. Like, these aren't even dummies. I mean, they're more so airsoft, right? Here's this. Here's an airsoft cartridge. It's a hole in the back. You can see it straight through. The airsoft goes through. There are physical differences where you can tell the difference between a real and a dummy round of ammunition if you would have done what? Checked. If you would have simply checked. That's all you had to do. And that's what's not being over. I think they're just throwing things against the wall to see what will stick. You can't overcome that burden of not checking. I don't see it. Sorry, I don't see it. Let's finish watching the rest of this and then we're out.
That it's a dummy. They're made to look just like a live round. Now, the picture counsel for the state showed earlier showed a hole in that round. That is how they make some of the dummies. It's not how they make all the dummies.
Correct.
Some of the dummies, unfortunately, do not shake and they do not have a hole in them.
That's correct.
And you're going to hear that one of those rounds was on this set. It's going to be in the CSI Tech, Miss Popple. It's in her report. It's called a Denix round from Spain. That round did not shake. So that's a dummy that looks like a live round, and it does not shake with the BB, so you can tell. Mr. Kuski is going to talk about how this is highly dangerous and how Miss Gutierrez-Reed was faced with a situation on this set of dealing with a mixed match of dummies, cheap dummies, he's going to call garbage, that were just thrown together that she had to deal with. Again, while OSHA's going to tell you she's being rushed, she's having to perform 2 jobs, she's asking for more resources and help from her manager, and she's not getting it. Third, you're going to hear that David Halls, the first assistant director, that he's going to say Miss Gutierrez-Reed was doing a good job. Now and she did good with safety on set. He was the first assistant director. He was the one that took the firearm and handed it to Baldwin. You're going to hear testimony that he never should have had that firearm. Never. You're going to hear from a director, PJ Pesh, who's done movies for over 30 years. PJ Pesh has done, you're going to hear about all his credits. He's worked on all kinds of movies. He's going to tell you that he's never seen a first assistant director in all those movies ever handle a weapon and hand it to the actor. This was a highly, highly unusual setup.
So it's still a bad argument. It's still a bad argument. So let's just say, here we go. Mag out, round out. Mag out, round out. Let's just say the firearm was just laying there. Do. Little curious kid comes up. Nothing happens if there isn't any ammunition. Oh, keep going. Bad arguments. Bad arguments.
And management created by production. That was their fault. And what they've tried to do, and what you're seeing in this courtroom today, is trying to blame it all on Hannah. The 24-year-old, because why? Because she's an easy target. She's the least powerful person on that set.
No, she was the most responsible.
So what do we do?
You just said, counselor, you just said her father trained her since she was little. One of the best to do it. Taught the Zale. Plymouth Rock landed on us. Taught Brad Pitt. She's been trained by the best. And didn't check. Come on now.
They target her. You're also going to hear that David Halls, he did not address prior safety issues. And this is part of the thing that OSHA found. David Halls, there were 2 accidental or negligent discharges on set. And what that is Sarah Zachary had one of them, and a stunt double for Baldwin had another one. What those are, you have a firearm with a blank in it, and you don't either decock it, it's called, where you put the hammer down slowly so it doesn't fire. You don't do that right, and then it goes off unexpectedly. Sarah Zachary did that. The second one you're going to hear, a stunt double had a misfire, and these were on the same day, 5 days before the shooting, October 16th, the same day within an hour apart. Miss Gutierrez-Reed addressed it by talking about them because these are safety incidents. You can't have misfires like this, negligent discharges like this. People are walking around, they don't have ear protection. These blanks can actually fire off stuff out of smoke and everything that can, it's dangerous. So David Halls did not do anything about it. Again, that's his job.
Neither did Hannah. If there were 2 negligent discharges, that would be all the more reason to check, recheck, and check again, and check and recheck to make sure that my equipment is functioning, that I'm doing my job. Come on, these are bad. You're giving the state ammunition, and I hope they're ready to take it. Oh, this trial is going to be interesting. Here we go.
Security coordinator for the entire set. But David Halls didn't delay. He didn't order additional training. You're going to hear some of the head people, if you hear from them in this trial for Russ Production, some of the head guys, they didn't even know about it. So they weren't informed about it. That's how much the production cared about safety. Because you know what the primary thing was here? It was rush, get this done so we can get the money. And that's all on production. And Mr. Baldwin is one of the primary producers. That's on them. Ms. Gutierrez-Reed had no control over that. Finally, you're going to hear from OSHA that Russ Production didn't adhere to several safety rules that they have to adhere to on set. That's why they were fined. They give them the.
All right, I'm going to end it here because I don't see him giving any more viable arguments. When he said finally and then said that, I don't find value in listening to. You can go to listen to the rest of it if you feel the need to, but I just don't feel the need to waste any more recording time on listening to this. Those are bad arguments. But sound off in the comments. What do you think? What do you think about the things that I demonstrated in front of? If the ammunition is nowhere near the firearm, you can press the trigger as many times as you want. Mag out, round out, mag out, round out. Here we go. If you can even point it. You're not getting anything. We do this when we dry fire. If no ammo is in the area, you're not going to have this. She only had. Sound off in the comments. What do you think? This is Instructor Mike, and you've been trained. This thing. What do you think? Let's talk about it. Just sign up in the comments, and don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe button, hit the bell for notifications, all that great stuff. This is Instructor Mike, and you've been trained. This case is going to be interesting. Day one was yesterday. This is day two. So I got way more to catch up. I'm going to listen to more testimony, listen to more things. It's going to be a pretty long trial, kind of, sort of, but it's going to be interesting to see. So come on back. When I find more interesting things, I'm going to put it on here because this is a case that I'm very much vested in. I just can't film it while it's going on because I have other things to do. But let's talk about it, okay? Sign up in the comments. Until then, I'll see you.